we fix that? He says you have to work with the planning department. They're gonna have to revise the land use plan for that particular section and present it to all the powers that be. It's gotta go through the planning commission, the board of supervisors, and then comes over to the coastal commission. So, when that conversation started, then I reached out to Supervisor Church. We had a meeting here at his office. It was Jordan, myself, Ivette, and we started that conversation, and that's when your name came up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Supervisor Church says, you need to talk to Craig Spencer, because he's overseeing this project. It's been a discussion for many, many years. All I can tell you is that I'm not very familiar with it, but the water basins, the survey that was done back in, I believe, 1990, you know, 1990, is why they're not allowing it. So when I heard 1990, I'm like, well, that definitely, we need to start bringing that back to the surface and understand why. Because there's still a lot of, obviously a lot of development happening, and, you know, I'm aware of some major big projects that fall under the coastal zone. And so I'm curious to understand why ADUs are not allowed, but yet these other commercial or other big developments are being allowed. So, I'd love for Craig then, and so then Craig and I had a meeting, we had a Zoom meeting, and you guys said you guys were working on a project to present to the planning commission in April. And so, obviously there's been some challenges and delays, and that's when I said, hey, if you can come to a meeting and give us an update, and so we can understand what those challenges are, because this is just a small group of those that are interested in supporting this and advocating for this, so then we can help you with that, because I was in the process of writing a letter to Robert Rivas and all the supervisors, but I wanted to wait until, to see where we're at, and see how we can help you.
Okay.
So that's just a brief history, everybody, okay?
I think it'd be great to write letters, by the way. And this is going to be a little bit of policy discussion versus water. And water gets complicated quickly. Policy is complicated already as it is, but what is happening here is we have geographic areas of the county, and each geographic area has its own plan. Essentially, kind of, there are 13 different area plans in the county. You mentioned Big Sur. Big Sur has its own land use plan area, and there are some accessory dwelling units allowed there, but they're limited, and there's a history to that I'll get into.
Okay.
What we do want to do is propose an ordinance that would allow accessory dwelling units. What we want to do is propose an ordinance that would allow accessory dwelling units everywhere we can allow them.
Okay.
And that is implementing state law first.
Okay, Gil, that's
So I'll get into some of the history. I think it'll help. Should be coming back up here. Well, it's coming up.
Castroville is not in the coastal zone, correct?
Correct.
So ADUs are allowed.
Castroville, ADUs are being built today.
Yet it's closer to the ocean.
Yeah, that part makes sense.
Yeah.
Exactly, because you think of the water intrusion, right? The salt water intrusion.
Yeah. So we have two plans that cover what we call North County.
Oh my god, I totally messed that up. There you.
I'm sure I could find a better map for us, but this shows the land use plan for North Monterey County. Land use plan, when I say land use plan, I'm referring to the coastal portion of the county's regulatory system.
Okay.
The North County area plan is gonna be everything east and a little bit south, actually. Castroville, you can see the cutout. You might need to help me keep that alive. So yeah, we're here. That's the area that's not colored here is inland, and that's part of the North County area plan. The county board of supervisors, and you know, with me being in my my job, we have the ability to propose regulations and adopt them in the inland areas. Some of it is subject to referendum or, various votes of the Board of Supervisors on setting policy. But they have the authority, the board has the authority in the inland area. In the coastal zone, which is everything from about Marina, up around Castroville, south of Highway 156, excluding portions of I guess around Oak Hills, and then back out almost to Highway 101, Manzanita Park, all the way up San Miguel.
Both sides of San Miguel?
No, just the west side of San Miguel. The areas that are colored here, and then out past Royal Oaks Park, all the way back up Salinas Road, Pajaro is excluded, Las Lomas is included, and then almost everything west of Highway 1 is coastal zone. This is the county boundary where the Pajaro River is. So this is all the North County land use plan area in the coastal zone. And in the coastal zone, there's a state law, Coastal Act, that is a place where the state California Coastal Commission has land use authority. They've given us permission as a county to do permitting in this area through certification of our North County land use plan. So all development has to be consistent with this North County land use plan. And that land use plan was certified by the Coastal Commission, giving us the authority to do the permitting locally, but they still maintain the ability to appeal our local decisions and overturn them or uphold them or whatever they do at the state level. So anytime we propose any land use changes, this is land use being the regulations that apply to development on private properties in all of this area. If we change the rules that apply to buildings here, those rules need to be certified by the Coastal Commission before they take effect. The Coastal Commission is the statewide organization that has area from Oregon to Mexico. And so we're in the Central Coast area, their main office is in Santa Cruz. That's the portion, that's the staff we deal with normally. So when this North County land use plan was certified, it was in the 80s, mid-80s. And at the time, it was already recognized that there was seawater intruding into the groundwater, under the ground, heading in towards Castroville. And that's actually still occurring, according to all of the data I've seen that's still being collected and reported on. So essentially what's happening is you have different groundwater sources, and I'll get into that a little bit more. A way up north is actually a different groundwater basin, the Pajaro groundwater basin, which is a whole different entity that manages that basin, and we share it with Santa Cruz County. Everything from about Hall Road south, I think, maybe a little north of Hall Road, is part of the Salinas Valley groundwater basin. And most of this is known as the 18400 aquifer. So there are different levels of water under the ground that are separated by layers of soil. And every time a well goes in, it starts drawing out, like a straw into that groundwater. What's happened is we're pulling more water out of the ground than it's going back in. And so that creates a pressure issue under the ground with the water flowing out towards the ocean. And instead, this ocean water is flowing in because that water in the ground is not in equilibrium. And so the North County Land Use Plan in the 80s identified essentially what it was called a build out. And they said they did a whole study of all of the parcels and all of the land in North County land use plan area, in this coastal area, and they said, and the zoning that was in place at the time, and they said, I don't know, 4,000 homes could be built based on the land and the zoning at the time. But we're going to say that only 1,500 homes can be built until a water solution is found. That's the policy that's been in place since the 80s. The Coastal Commission, we actually have not gotten to that 1,500 number, and 1,500 may be the wrong number, so don't quote me on that exact number. It's some thousand, but 2,000 maybe, somewhere around there. But anyway, the Coastal Commission essentially feels like we've reached our threshold, we're still in overdraft and there's no groundwater. So we shouldn't be intensifying any land use in this area until a water solution is found. There's been a lot of things that have happened around water. There's been the Castroville Seawater Intrusion Project, which essentially treats wastewater and uses it for irrigation of crops around Castroville. That reduces the water being pumped by the farmers to water their crops because they're using recycled water instead of groundwater. There have also been dams and releases at the dams way down almost San Luis Obispo County to keep water flowing up the Salinas River, coming up here, to help try and recharge the groundwater basin just from infiltration of the surface water into the ground. There's been a lot done with water conservation and all of that to help address the problem, but we still haven't come into a balance of what is being taken out and what's going back in. There are more plans in place, and in, I think, 2020 or somewhere close to that, the state passed the State Groundwater Management Act, which required the formation of groundwater management agencies who have to develop groundwater sustainability plans, and those plans have to identify how we're going to address the issues and bring it into compliance. So, all of that being said, ADUs were not a thing in the 80s. Accessory dwelling units weren't a concept yet. What was a concept were caretaker units, senior citizen housing units, like granny units they're called, and guest houses. And those were all regulated. And they were not allowed, I don't think, in North County.
Yeah, they were.
They were.
The granny
Stopped.
units.
Granny units were allowed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stopped in the late 80s.
Yeah. So the zoning ordinance then in the coastal zone implements the land use plan policies. And they're layers of policies. So land use plan is a general plan level document that has a bunch of general policies about how development should be regulated. And then the zoning ordinance gives more specifics about how many units per acre you can have and what the height limits are in your setbacks and what uses are allowed on your property. You can build a house in a residential zone, you can have crops or cows in an agricultural zone. All that kind of stuff is addressed in there. When accessory dwelling unit law was passed in 2007, 8, somewhere around there, by the state, they essentially eliminated the granny units from state law. And the reasoning partially was you cannot discriminate who lives in a unit based on their age. And the concept was accessory dwelling units are going to essentially be able to double the housing without subdivisions and a whole bunch more effort. It'll give each individual property owner the opportunity to have a place to put their in-laws or their parents or family members, or rent it out and have that income. And it was seen as a way of addressing some of the housing issues we have. So the first laws were pretty permissive and said, local governments, you have to allow accessory dwelling units in all areas that allow houses, but you can adopt rules that, and those rules can only do certain things. But there's a clause, and there still is a clause in that state ADU law that says, but nothing in the state ADU law supersedes the Coastal Act, which is an equivalent state law. And so in 2011, after we adopted the general plan for the inland areas, we updated our codes and eliminated the caretaker unit, senior citizen unit, replaced it with accessory dwelling unit. And in 2011, we had this same argument that we're having today, which is, are they allowed in North County? Essentially, we took some of the same restrictions that were in place for caretaker units or senior units countywide, and we just made them applicable to ADUs in the coastal zone. And that was a way for us to get through the coastal commission process. When we did that in 2011, they were not willing to support us having rules that allowed accessory dwelling units in North County, and the reason was the water issue. We don't have a long-term water solution. And in fact, in the inland area, the general plan did say that you couldn't have a caretaker unit or ADU at the time as well, for the same reason. The state law's been updated many times since 2011, and the rules we have in place are outdated, but they do not allow ADUs in North County coastal right now. In 2019, 2020, we updated our ADU regulations. We brought to the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission 2 ordinances. One for the inland area, which was adopted and is in place now. So everything outside these colored areas in North County are allowed to have ADUs now, but only up to 850 square feet. Essentially, because of the way the laws are written, we have a confusing ordinance that says you can't build them here, except you can if they're 850 square feet or less. So that's just because you're allowed to deem areas off limits, but there are certain state exempt ADUs of a certain size that we said we're going to allow anyway, despite it being deemed off limits. There are up to 850 square feet allowed now, and we can permit them in the inland areas. The problem is, we still have the need to identify the water source. So that means actually what's coming out of the well, not the whole groundwater system, but do you have enough ability to pump water out of the well that's serving your development, or connect to a water system if you're on a water system? And is that water quality good enough for a new connection? And do you have enough acreage to support the added septic load if you're on a septic system? So sometimes that means you need an acre or 2 acres to have the right amount of area to disperse all the treatment of the septic system. If you're on a sewer, it's not an issue, as long as the sewer you're connecting to doesn't make it an issue. It hasn't been an issue. But when you're on septic, there are some rules that apply that limit your ability even further to build an ADU. So that, we go through that with people all the time, but for the time being, ADUs are still not allowed in North County because that second ordinance we brought to the board, which was the same version of the inland ordinance that was adopted, did not get certified by the Coastal Commission. And one of the reasons is that it would have allowed that same exception to deeming this area off limits, but allowing up to 850 square feet with a coastal permit even. They said, we can't support that, and there were a couple other things that we got into debates over with them. So, and them, I should clarify, So, just like I am staff of Monterey County, I work for the planning department. I don't make the decisions, I make recommendations to the planning commission or the board of supervisors, and they make the decisions. It's the same with them. They have staff who are coastal commission staff, they make recommendations to their commission, who are appointed by the governor. And essentially we got bogged down with staff. And they convinced us that we should not move forward with that version of the ordinance. A lot of things have happened in between now and then, including a whole bunch of other work that's occurred, but we've been meeting with the coastal commission staff to find ways through and around some of the issues that have come up. And we're still talking to them about, we actually have them now. I met with them yesterday or the day before. The coastal commission staff is now seeing some of the judgments that are coming out in other areas of California that continue to be very pro ADU. Like governments, including the state, need to be as permissive as possible of ADUs. And so, and they're seeing a lot of the housing issues and getting that same pressure at the state level to be more permissive of housing. So their position right now is, we don't want to be in a position where we can't recommend approval of an ordinance that would allow ADUs. But county staff, we want you to propose some regulations that address the groundwater issue in some holistic way. And the reason for that is they're looking at the Coastal Act policies, which protect access to the beach, so you don't have to pay. I'm from the East Coast originally, and I've been to beaches that you can't get on unless you pay someone. It's a great thing, but they also protect everything that is influenced by being near the ocean. So Elkhorn Slough is, a wetland of importance to them, and everything that drains to it, and all the vegetation and land use around it that could impact it is important to them. So they start regulating habitats, vegetation, all the water issues around it. They also have a policy that says the agricultural lands in the coastal zone actually are a bigger priority than housing in the coastal zone. So they want to preserve water for coastal agricultural uses. And they're trying to get us to give them something that they'll be able to sign off on that will address water sort of holistically within a policy that allows accessory dwelling units in North County. And they're willing to negotiate that now where they weren't before. So we've made some progress, but the actual policy language that we're working with them on is the detail that's kind of got us missing the April projected date, but we will be back in front of the planning commission in May or June. I'll have to double check that. I'll look before we leave today. But it could be something like, you can build an accessory dwelling unit with a permit if you can demonstrate that you're not increasing water demand on your property. So you're adding a house, but you're subtracting something. You're subtracting landscaping, or you're putting in a whole bunch of low flow toilets, or you're taking out the wash basin in your, yeah, it's not exactly water credits because you don't have to deal with them up here. That's in concept what they're looking for. There's several ways of getting at that, but, and it's not exactly that either, or it doesn't have to be. So the details of what that is and what it looks like in a regulation is really where we're at. But I think we have the support of our supervisors that they, especially Supervisor Church, is supportive of an ordinance that would allow accessory dwelling units in some fashion here. I think we also have this recognition that there is a water problem, and we should be doing something to address it. And so how do we balance those two in a policy specific to accessory dwelling?
Is that when you have your own well or on like a city well? Depending on where you live.
That doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
There are small water systems, there's single connection water systems, there's large water systems. Essentially, all these systems draw from a well. And the water connection, you will have to demonstrate that you have the ability to connect to a system that's permitted that allows you to connect. So
Is there like?
you can't build any housing unit that's intended to be lived in by someone without having adequate water. That's one of the fundamentals of allowing a house or any housing development is you have to have water and you have to have sewer.
Yeah.
The county already has approved ADU designs, right? There's already like a set
Yes.
of plans and stuff.
Yes.
So hypothetically, someone could follow those plans, save the costs on architectural designs, and that would probably expedite getting approved.
Yes.
One,
But let me ask you though, what's the smallest size of those three designs, those three models?
There are 3 designs.
Yes,
yeah.
One is 750.
so that would be the only one potentially.
There's
that-
another that's 850.
50, okay.
And then there's a 1,200 square foot one.
Okay, so 2 out of the 3 would be options potentially.
Yes.
And there are already options for people that are east of San Miguel, or east of 101.
Or anywhere not in.
Or-
Just
very close to
everyone else.
Phoenix.
Basically,
Not in a-
Royal Oak, Strawberry, Elkhorn, and Moss Landing is kind of a really impacted area.
So you can be in coastal
You guys
commission?
are not in this commission. Yeah.
No coastal commission? Not
Well-
If
no?
you're
Well,
in the
that's
coastal
another
zone.
thing we're discussing with them.
Right
that is
now.
tangential to all of this is there's a definition of development in the coastal zone that includes everything. Anytime you're putting something that's, on the ground or in the ground, or moving the ground even, removing trees and vegetation, it's all part of the definition of development. And under the Coastal Act, development requires a coastal development permit, which means, that means you have to go through public hearings, and you have to pay for permits, and you have to have plans drawn up, unless you use the pre-approved plans.
There you go.
Chelsea's
them.
bringing up for us. Thank you. And that takes sometimes months, and it's expensive. And so we're trying to find ways that we can exempt ADUs from coastal development permits. The state law and the ADU law says we can require permits, but we shouldn't require public hearings. And that's another one of those things where we're trying to mesh 2 different sets of state laws that don't mesh well. But our intent is to exempt them from coastal development permits where we can. What the Coastal Commission is saying on that though is, if you're in or near a wetland, you're still gonna need a coastal development permit. If you're removing oak trees to build your ADU, you're still gonna need a coastal development permit. Those resource-based things are the things that are gonna keep you from being exempt from a coastal development permit, but the development of the ADU itself, hopefully we can exempt from permits so that in a semi-flat area where you're not in a wetland or a river or removing trees, you don't need that permit. You'll still need building permits. And that's why we have those pre-approved ADU plans. They're already engineered, they're already designed, they're already plan checked. You won't the architect or designer or structural engineers if you wanna use one of those pre-approved plans.
So Craig, just to kind of recap and talk about where you're at today, it sounds like you are ready to submit a proposal with some solutions holistically
Yeah.
by what you were talking about with, you know, what would you recommend someone to submit a permit to resolve that water solution or sustain it with?
So if you have ideas on how essentially what's happening is we are reworking the draft regulations that are going to apply to who can build an ADU and where in the coastal zone, all of the coastal zone. It's not just a North County issue right now. We have the old rules from 2011 still in place in the coastal zone, the entire thing from from the southern part of Big Sur up to Santa Cruz County. So we need to get this in place, not just for North County, but for the whole coastal area.
So, there's a lot of, systems, water systems in
Yeah.
Monterey County, and, a lot of them are very poor systems, they're out of compliance. And there isn't a lot of, funds to go around and make sure that everybody is compliant. But all of those systems would probably really enjoy to have this extra accessory dwelling. So, would it be, I guess, would a trade-off be if within a community, like the Langley, area, Rancho, Langley is what they call, yes,
Sub-basin.
right,
This area.
is if they decide maybe to create a water district in exchange for.
Yeah, that's not that easy to do.
No, it's
I'm
not, but it is a
sure
trade-off.
that I've actually had this conversation multiple times. We're working on our housing element as well, and a number of other rules and regulations, all at the same time, but, there's so many areas of the county where sewer and water infrastructure could be extended, so that people aren't on septic systems or their own individual wells. But anytime you do that, the county doesn't own any utilities. We're not operating any of the utilities. You have the special district in Castroville for your sewer. You have Pajarosa and Mesa, water service areas. They operate it. They're not regulated by the county. So, and they're doing maintenance of their systems and making sure that they have the wells and the treatment systems that serve their existing connections. But if you're adding connections, they're going to need you to pay for the extra capacity of the pipes and the infrastructure to expand their service area. And that's all regulated by the local agency formation committee, or LAFCO, where there are certain service areas for utilities, and they have boundaries, and anytime you change those boundaries and extend utilities, it has to be approved by LAFCO, and there's a lot of demand in a lot of communities for that kind of thing, but not a lot of money to do it.
But using the SAFE program,
SAFE program?
or I think it's SAFER, I think that's what it is.
I'm not
They,
sure. I mean, I think community groups, if you can get, efforts together, it's a lot of work
yeah.
to get something like that done, but, the other thing that happens when you do that is if you start extending sewer pipelines out towards Morocojo and you keep going, that then increases the likelihood that more development will happen along that line.
Mhm.
because now you're removing kind of a constraint. And another state law that's really complicated is California Environmental Quality Act. You have to actually analyze the physical impact of extending that pipeline, the physical impact of increasing the capacity of a sewer treatment plant, and the potential growth-inducing effects.
But for a district, you don't need to have a sewer treatment plant, but just a water district. Is that?
Sometimes
have to
they're,
have both,
sometimes
you
they're the
just
same
have
and
one.
sometimes they're separate.
Right.
But yes, you, in order to build an ADU, you're show an adequate water supply. So is it coming from a water system? In the street, in the pipe, and the water district will have to give you as we can and will serve you the if you're that those wells are regulated either by the county or by the state, depending on the size of the system, and there's usually some technical, managerial, financial structure on how that water system gets operated, how many connections it has, and if it's out of compliance, you may need to install treatment systems before you can connect a new unit to a system that's not in compliance. So it gets more complicated. Those are ones that maybe really could use grant funding to help bring them into
But
compliance.
there's no regulation, like, I consider a lot of these small water systems in this county as feral water systems, because there isn't a whole lot of oversight of them and water usage. Like example, we have 22 connections, and we use 980,000 gallons of water in the month of August. That is more water than raging waters over the hill. So, that's just in 1 month.
Yeah.
So, I consider it, a lot of these are, feral, right?
Yes.
They're old systems that, don't fall under the new regulations with, now that you create one, as of what, 14, something like that. But, so how does an older water system that does not have that kind of oversight, with 24 connections, with that high use, without meters, because it's not mandated yet?
If that well is capable of having a 24th connection, and it has either the treatment it needs to have for the quality of the water, or it has good quality already, you can connect to it as long as this system that's regulated was established in a way that would allow a new connection. You have the capacity in the pump to pump the actual water out, and that water is clean enough to drink in the end, then you can connect to it. They're probably, careful what you wish for. If your system isn't metered and you can use as much water as you want from your system, then maybe there should be, adjustable rates like they do on the
Discussions.
peninsula, and people start using a lot less water. But they are permitted usually and inspected from time to time to make sure that, and so the water and the sewer or septic capacity can be a limiting factor for anyone, particularly on a small lot, on a real small water system that's out of compliance, or on a septic system where you don't have a lot of area for your leach fields.
I had a question. Is the plan, sorry if I interrupted,
Thank you.
but, the plan you're going to the Coastal Commission with, are you incorporating new construction? Like the widening of 156 that's been in the talks? That's I'm sure there's drainage and bioretention basins that are gonna improve groundwater and.
Yeah, that project actually did not get appealed, I think, or maybe it did. It got approved by the Coastal Commission, either because they didn't appeal it or because they got approved to them and they decided it was okay to move forward, but that's
Right away?
And it's to realign Castroville Boulevard
Yeah.
and put in, and to, I think there's like
A roundabout.
a roundabout kind of thing.
Well,
It's
just
an
speaking
intersection.
selfishly, I live in Oak Hills,
Yeah.
so
There is
would
a
it be
plan.
reconsidered to rezone some of that area, right, out of the coastal commission if they're gonna go improve that?
Well, when Caltrans went through this, because they were expanding south of 156 of where it exists now, they had to take out of production a certain amount of agricultural land, row crops, all the strawberries and everything, so.
Sorry,
I don't know.
fired.
No.
Oh, there it is.
So, they actually were required to mitigate for that.
Other ways.
By purchasing land, that's in agricultural production and putting an agricultural conservation easement on it and saying this will be agriculture in perpetuity. It cost them a lot of money to do. They also had to get special legislation because it crosses the slough right here. And there are protected species that are regulated by another state agency, but that didn't have anything to do with,
The housing.
with water or housing, really.
Cause if not, then the Chispa project that's slated for that corner would be able to move forward, but we still have the issue, as he said, that the coastal commission doesn't permit additional housing in its defined.
No, that, yeah, I guess,
geographic
I was just wondering if that's, if new construction projects, Martha touched on, there's all these developments going in, and they're all required to have bioretention basins incorporated into them, and other, would that change the mapping or the zoning in any way around the areas? Just so it's not a big green
Not really,
blob.
but, we have had the argument with the coastal commission about SIGMA, the State Groundwater Management Act. And the Salinas Valley Groundwater Management Agency was formed for the purpose of fixing the groundwater conditions. And they have an adopted groundwater sustainability plan that does identify projects that are supposed to help bring this groundwater into a sustainable system. So those projects, some of them are years out, you know. I don't know where the funding comes from. Some of it is actually pulling water. If you look at groundwater contours and the seawater intrusion, you know, some of it's actually pulling groundwater out towards the coast, even getting into Castroville, and it's starting to creep almost all the way to Salinas now. It's pulling water out, desalinating, taking the salt out, and then injecting it
Desalinization.
back in the ground to help that fresh water balance with the salt water, you know, stop going inland at least, but maybe eventually go back towards the ocean. But those kinds of projects they take a lot of planning, a lot of money, someone to actually do it. They're identified as being things that can help right now. And we're relying a little bit on the idea that they will happen, because the state is kind of mandating that as well, through that SIGMA, that State Groundwater Management Act. In fact, the state can come take over management of the groundwater basin if the Salinas Valley Groundwater Management Agency doesn't do what they're supposed to do by 2040. So we're making that argument as well. That's a bigger picture solution. And they do anticipate there will be some development. They also acknowledge that agriculture uses like 80% of the groundwater.
91.
It depends on which area, what you're looking at, but at least 80% of the groundwater that's being taken out of the ground is for irrigation of crops and maybe even some animals, but mostly, the share of the residential use of water is it's 20% at most. And through efficiency measures and everything over time, even if you grow, you're still not really growing the amount of water that's using. And we have all these conversations with the Groundwater Management Agency. But still not solved today. So, until there's a solution, which is actually in the North County Land Use Plan language, you know, that we're kind of limited in what we're doing. But again, the solution for, can you implement a rainwater catchment system? Can you capture water and have it infiltrate back into the ground on your property? Can you reduce your landscaping? Can you do something that addresses the amount of water you're proposing to use versus the amount of water that's available to use, which is none? So what that regulation looks like, I don't have the answer to today, but at least we have the ability to propose something that the Coastal Commission will accept, and then we'll have to live with in some way. So you might have you might have another thing to do in building an ADU that not every other place has, but that thing is addressing the groundwater conditions until there's a solution. And you'll be able to do it if you can get there.
So that's the language that you're working on right now.
Yes.
With those criteria to submit to the planning commission on revising the land.
Yeah, so all zoning ordinances or, you know, land use policy changes, they have to go to the planning commission for a recommendation to the board of supervisors. The board of supervisors for adoption or a resolution of intent to adopt in the coastal zone, either way. And then they have to go to the coastal commission for certification. If we do a resolution of intent to adopt, the coastal commission can make changes to our ordinance, send it back to us for final adoption. If we adopt it and submit it as is, they either have to accept or reject it.
So what's the timeline you're looking at for something like that?
We intend to be in front of the board in July, I think, end of July, with the ordinance. So June for planning commission, July for board, then we'll submit to the coastal commission, and it's a little bit out of our hands at that point. But typically, it'll take, you know, as long as they don't reject our submittal, which has happened before, it'll take 4 to 6 months, I would guess. They meet monthly, once a month. And their meetings are up and down California, so they try and have, you know, something like this. They might try and get on an agenda where it's not that far away. Maybe somewhere between Sonoma and Santa Barbara counties, somewhere central at least. And that's where all of these hearings and letters you might write or showing up to the hearings, particularly when it gets to the coastal commission, if they have a hearing, and, you know, expressing your thoughts and support for having ADUs is really helpful.
That's the goal that we've been talking about. This is why we wanted to bring you to kind of understand where we're at today. And that way, you know, we'll discuss how we can write some letters of support, but keeping us informed of these next meetings on the agenda. I mean, we do have a LULAC member that's part of the planning commission.
Yeah.
So he's been trying to let us know because I haven't seen it on the
Yeah.
agenda, you know, so we wanna be there to support and, hopefully these criteria that he's talking about will allow us to submit the permit, with these regulations. It'd be, understand what those are gonna be.
The first representative this region has had on the commission for a long time. We went a while without any representation this high. So commissioners are appointed by the governor?
Supervisors.
The coastal commissioners
Oh,
are
yeah.
appointed by the governor.
I think there's I think there's 30 commissioners or something.
Okay.
and
Number
10 of them
But
are
this-
appointed by the governor.
But the Central Coast hasn't had a representative on that commission for quite a while until recently,
Right,
is that correct?
Dave Potter.
Yeah, Justin Cummings is our representative in
So
Santa
he's a
Cruz.
Santa Cruz County supervisor, but he represents our region on the coastal
On the
commission.
coast,
And
Justin.
we had an empty seat for like years, which is crazy, but,
So I think this was really helpful, so